Okay, so we got our schedules mixed up a little bit, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Well, you were gonna write a sentence with moccasin. Did you do that? Did you do that?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to read them?
Yes.
Okay, go right ahead.
I brought a new pink fluffy moccasins for my dog.
Okay. Yeah, because Buck wore moccasins, didn't he? To help his feet, to protect his feet from the snow and ice. Okay, good one. What else? Anything else?
No, I only write one sentence.
All right, that's fine. Well,
Yesterday, my mom ordered me 2 books. This is 101 Indian fabric for children, and my mom buy me this one.
oh, very nice. Have you read anything yet?
Yes, they
Yes.
will start from here. God created the world.
Uh-huh.
And this book is your book. I want to tell you this story for today because it's a funny story. Can I tell you the story of today?
Yes, if you'd like to. The Fox and the Villager.
Yes, and this is 2 funny stories.
Okay. Now, don't read fast. Okay. Pronounce all the syllables. Okay, go ahead.
Fox that had long beak. The day of the villagers proudly yard was one day found lying breathless in the fell. The river went about that all after had been. Can you tell me the spelling? I'm not understanding this one.
Okay.
CAUGHT.
Caught. Like you caught the ball. You caught the ball. Caught.
Caught and killed by someone. In a moment, everybody in the village came out to see the dead fox. The village coughed with all his hands and cheeks. There was also there to enjoy the sight of the fox. The fox then got up and shaking off his drunkenness, said, I ate a number of hens and chicks last night. Can you tell me this spelling? This is so hard for me.
Okay. Sure.
HENCE.
Hence. Hence.
Hence.
It means that's why or because. Hence.
I must have stumbled long than I used. The cock counted his hens and chicks and found a number wanting. Said, now is it? I didn't know. I know of it, my dear sir, said the father, as he returned to the woods. It was last night. I had a good meal on your shoes. Yet you didn't know of it. A moment ago, they found lying in the fell. felt a moment ago, they found me lying in the field, and you know of it all. This is the story.
Ill news travels fast.
Ill news travels fast.
That's it.
Yes, and I'm going to read another story tomorrow.
Okay. Well, you practice it really well. Now tell me, can you just tell me the story that you just read in your own words? What happened to the fox? What did he do? I had trouble understanding you. So
One
today.
day the fox stomach was too heavy, and the fox fell in a deep sleep. One of the villagers saw the fox, and he think the fox was dead and someone killed. The villager went to the village and said to everyone the fox was dead. Everyone were enjoying the sight. All the village hands with all the cocks with hens and chicks. They
Okay.
were all enjoying the sight. After one moment, the fox woke up shaking and drowsiness. Everyone shocked. The fox said, "Oh, my dear villagers, I ate a lot of hens and chicks last night, and I fell to deep sleep." Counted his hens and chicks, and he was half to go. And he is counting, but there are less hens and chicks. He think, "I don't know this. In which time it happened?" The fox said, "My dear sir, the last night I had a good meal on your hands."
Okay. Okay.
And this I wanted to understand it.
Okay. Very good. Very good. That was a funny story. So what are you going to read? What will you read tomorrow?
I'm going to read the story of the glowworm and the dwarf, because this glowworm said to the glowworm said to the dwarf, "Come with me. I had more glowworms in the forest. Come," and she taken to the fireplace, and the fire sparkles are coming up, and the glowworm is saying to the dwarf, "See the little fireworms are there. Go and catch them." And the dwarf go to that and trying to eat that, and the dwarf mouth was going to burn, and he said, "Oh, this little glowworm was so dangerous little creature," and he fly and go.
Okay. Okay. Well, are you ready for me to read? Are you ready?
Yes.
You want me to read? So this is called Who Will Lead? Remember, Buck and Spitz had a fight, and Spitz was the leader of the dog sled.
The Buck will be the leader now.
So, well, Buck wants to be the leader, so let's see if he gets to be the leader. The question is, who will lead? What I say? I speak true when I say that, Buck, two devils, said Francois the next morning. That Spitz fight like the devil, said Perrault, as he looked over the rips and cuts. And that Buck fight like two devils, was Francois's answer. And now we make good time. No more spits, no more trouble, sure. Perrault packed up and loaded the sled while Francois started to harness the dogs. Buck trotted up to the place Spitz used to hold as leader. Francois, not noticing him, brought Solix to the lead. Buck sprang upon Solix in a fury, driving him back and standing in his place. Eh, eh, cried Francois, slapping his thighs gleefully. Look at dat Buck. Him kills dat Spitz. Him thinks to take the job. Go away now, Buck. Buck refused to budge. He took Buck by the scruff of the neck, dragged him to one side, and put Solix back in the lead. The old dog did not like it. He was afraid of Buck. When Francois turned his back, Buck again made Solix step aside. Francois was angry. Now, by darn, I fix you, he cried, coming back with a heavy club in his hand. Buck remembered the man in the red sweater and backed away slowly. He did not charge in when Solix was once more put in the lead. He circled just beyond reach of the club, snarling with rage. The driver went about his work. He called to Buck when he was ready to put him in the old place, in his old place in front of Dave. Buck took 2 or 3 steps back. Francois followed him up. Buck retreated again. After some time of this, Francois threw down the club, thinking that Buck feared a thrashing. But Buck was in open revolt. Francois thought Buck was afraid of a thrashing. Do you know what a thrashing is?
No.
Well, it's like a beating with a club, getting hurt and fighting. So Buck didn't want to get hurt by that club that Francois was holding. So he backed away. He was afraid of getting beaten with that club. He wanted to be the leader. It was his by right. He had earned it, and he would not be content with less. Perrault came to help, but for an hour, the 2 men could not get Buck into position. They threw clubs at him. He dodged. They yelled at him, and he snarled and kept out of their reach. He did not try to run away, but retreated around and around the camp. Francois sat down and scratched his head. Perrault angrily looked at his watch. Time was flying by. They should have been on the trail an hour ago. Francois scratched his head again. He shook it and grinned at Perrault, who shrugged his shoulders. Then Francois went to where Solix stood and called to Buck. Buck laughed, as dogs laughed, yet kept his distance. Francois unfastened Solix's traces and put him back in his old place. The team stood harnessed and ready for the trail with only one spot open, the lead position. Francois called and Buck trotted right in, laughing in triumph. He swung around in position at the head of the team. His traces were fastened and the sled was broken out, and with 2 men running, they dashed out onto the river trail. So let's see, these 2 guys are trying to get, Francois and Perrault trying to get Buck back in his old place in the team, but Buck wanted the lead position where Spitz had, so he was not going to have anything else. So here we go. Buck is in the front of the team, pulling the sled. Buck proved to be an excellent leader. He kept order among the dogs and kept the team moving at a fast pace. Dave and Sullux did not mind the change in leadership. They loved the work, the toil in the traces, and Buck worked them hard. Do you know what toil is? Toil is hard work. It's just you work and work and work and work. They loved the work, the toil in the traces, all of the hard work that they were doing. The rest of the team had grown unruly during Spitz's last days, and they were surprised at how Buck got them all into shape. Pike, who pulled at Buck's heels, was used to being lazy. Buck swiftly punished him, and before the first day was done, Pike was pulling more than ever before in his life. The first night in camp, Joe, the sour one, was disciplined with bites and snarls. Buck let the team know who was boss now, and the team improved greatly. Once more, the dogs leaped as one dog in the traces. At the Rink Rapids, 2 native huskies, Teak and Kuna, were added. Buck broke them so quickly it took away Francois's breath. "Never such a dog as that Buck," he cried. "No, never. Him worth $1,000 for sure. Eh? What you say, Perot?" Perot just nodded. He was ahead of the record then and gaining day by day. The trail was in excellent condition, well packed and hard. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so there goes the dog team pulling the sled down the river trail. There was no new soft snow and it was not too cold. The men rode and ran by turn, and the dogs kept on the jump. On the last night of the second week, they topped White Pass and dropped down the sea slope toward Skagway. It was a record run. Each day for 14 days, they averaged 40 miles. When they reached Skagway, the team became the center of attention by a crowd of dogbusters and mushers. The mission was now complete. The 2 Canadians and had new orders that required a fresh team of dogs. Francois called Buck to him, threw his arms around him, and cried goodbye. And that was the last of Francois and Perot. Like other men, they passed out of Buck's life for good.
Ah, Buck is so big.
So now, Francois and Perot are no longer going to be the people that Buck pulled the sled for. So the team is going to be taken over by another person, and their job is going to be moving mail and supplies from place to place. So it's a different kind of work.
And the man had the dog. The dog is a husky dog or Buck, because Buck is too small and huskies are big. I'm not understanding that.
Yeah, well, huskies are bigger and usually bigger, or not a lot bigger, but Buck was Buck was the leader. I mean, he was a dog that wanted to be the leader, and he made the other dogs obey, whether they were huskies or not. So the other dogs respected Buck, and Buck got them to do their work the way he wanted to.
And the huskies also respect Buck.
Yes, yes, yes. Buck made them respect him. The 2 huskies that were added to the team, Teak and Kuna, Buck made sure that they knew who was boss, and he put them in their place, and they respected Buck, and they worked for the team as one dog. Okay. There's another chapter here I can read, or we could stop for the day. What would you like to do? Would you like me to go on, or would you like to stop?
I would like to. I would like to go.
You want me to go ahead? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll read the next chapter then. It's called The Toil of the Trail. Remember I said toil was hard work?
Yeah, hard work.
The hard work of the trail. A mail carrier, a Scotsman, took charge of Buck's team along with a dozen other dog teams. The sleds were loaded up with sacks of mail, and the dogs started back over the weary trail to Dawson. The running was hard now. The loads were heavy. There was toil each day. There were no record times. Buck did not like it, but he pulled hard and took pride in his work, just like Dave and Solix did. As leader, he made sure that every dog did his fair share of the work. It was a boring life. One day was very much like the other. At a certain time each morning, the cooks turned out, fires were built, and breakfast was eaten. Then, while some broke camp, others harnessed the dogs, and they were underway an hour or so before dawn. At night, camp was made. Some pitched the tents, others cut firewood, and collected pine branches for beds. Still others carried water or ice for the cooks. Then the dogs were fed their meal of fish. This was the one time of the day when the team could relax for an hour or so with the other dogs.
Camps.
So the cooks were feeding the dogs their meat. Best of all, Buck loved to lie near the fire with his eyes blinking dreamily at the flames. Sometimes he thought of Judge Miller's big house in the sunny Santa Clara Valley and of the swimming tank. But more often he remembered the man in the red sweater, the death of Curly, the great fight with Spitz, and the good things he had eaten or would like to eat. He was not homesick. His old home was a very dim and distant memory. Far more powerful were his instincts. These new instincts seemed to come from ancestors long ago. Instincts are behaviors or knowledge that you already have in your brain without learning. And many animals have instincts to behave or do certain things without learning to do them. It's just natural, already programmed into their brain. So that's what we're talking about here. Buck's instincts, or the knowledge that he has from his past, passed down from generation to generation of dogs. These new instincts seem to come from ancestors long ago, from a time when the dog was a wild breed running with a wilder sort of man. Sometimes, as he crouched there, blinking at the flames, it seemed that the flames were of another fire. As if in a dream, he saw a different man from the Canadian cook in front of him. This other man had short he peered or looked into it. He clutched a stick with a heavy stone at one end. He was a hairy, primitive man, a primordial man. He did not stand up straight, but leaned forward from the hips on legs that bent at the knees, as if ready to pounce out of fear. So Buck is dreaming about what I would call a caveman or a prehistoric man. It's just a dream. The man I just described was not real. It's just Buck was thinking about or looking at the fire, and then all of a sudden he started seeing a fire from a different time.
Who is that man?
Well, it's a man that's in Buck's dream. He was kind of dreaming, and it's a man that before modern man, he was a prehistoric man. And he described him as hairy, and his hair was matted, and he was afraid of the dark, and before it was man the way they first were in the world as we understand it. So anyway, at other times, this hairy man squatted by the fire with his head between his legs and slept. And beyond that fire in the darkness, Buck could see many gleaming eyes, always 2 by 2, which he knew to be the eyes of great beasts of prey. And he could hear the crashing of their bodies through the undergrowth and the noises they made in the night. He's still dreaming, and he's still seeing things beyond the man. These sounds and sights of his dreamlike world would make the hair rise along his back. He would whimper low and growl softly, and the cook would shout at him, "Hey, Buck, wake up, you're dreaming." Then the other world would vanish, and the real world would come into his eyes. He would get up and yawn and stretch as though he had been asleep. The loads of mail were heavy, and this was a hard trip. The work wore the dogs down. They were in poor condition when they finally pulled into Dawson and should have had a week-long rest. But within 2 days' time, they were loaded up again to take more mail loads. The dogs were tired, the drivers grumbled, and to make matters worse, it snowed every day. This meant a soft trail and heavier pulling for the dogs. The drivers were fair through it all, and they did their best for the dogs. Each night, the dogs were attended to first. They ate before the drivers ate, and no man went to sleep without first checking on the feet of the dogs he drove. Still, their strength went down. Since the beginning of winter, they had traveled nearly 2,000 miles, dragging sleds the whole way. Buck stood it, leading his team well, though he too was very tired. Billy cried and whimpered in his sleep each night. Joe was more sour than ever, and Solix only wanted to be left alone. But it was Dave who suffered the most of all. He became more sad and irritable. When camp was pitched, he made his nest at once, where his driver fed him. He did not get on his feet again until harness up time in the morning. He often cried out in pain in the traces. The driver examined him but couldn't find anything. All the drivers became interested in his case. They talked it over at mealtime. He was brought from his nest to the fire and was pressed and prodded till he cried out many times. Something was wrong inside of him, but they could feel no broken bones. By the time they reached Cassiar Bay, he was so weak that again and again he fell in the traces. The Scotch mail carrier called a halt and took him out of the team, making the next dog, Solix, the new wheeler next to the sled. He wanted to give Dave a rest and let him run free behind the sled. Sick as he was, Dave would have no part of this. He growled while his traces were removed. He whimpered brokenheartedly as he saw Solix in the position he had held and served so long. His pride was hurt, and this was more painful than his illness. He could not bear that another dog should do his work. So Dave got really sick, and he could no longer pull in the sled, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. So they unharnessed him and they let him just run behind the sled. When the sled started, Dave ran alongside the team, trying to get back into his place, crying with grief and pain. The driver whipped him, but he paid no attention to the strings. The man didn't have the heart to strike harder. Dave struggled to run behind the sled. Then he fell, howling as the long train of sleds went by. With the last bit of his strength, he managed to stagger along behind until the train made another stop. He somehow reached his own sled and stood alongside Solix. His driver stopped a moment to get a light for his pipe. Then he returned and started his dogs. They swung out on the trail with no effort at all, but then stopped in surprise. The driver was surprised too. The sled had not moved. He called the other men over to see the strange sight. Dave had bitten through both of Solix's traces and was standing directly in front of the sled in his proper place. The dog pleaded with his eyes to remain there. Since Dave was dying, the men agreed that he should die in the traces where he wanted to be. So he was harnessed in, and he proudly pulled again, though more than once he cried out from the pain within. So poor Dave, he was very, very sick, but he wouldn't give up his place where he was with the team. He was positioned right in front of the sled, and he didn't want to give that position up, as sick as he was. He held out till camp was reached, and his driver made a place for him by the fire. In the morning, he was too weak to travel. His strength had left him, and he was dying. He could not be harnessed, and the team went on without him. The whips snapped, the bells jingled merrily, the sleds churned along the trail. Buck knew, and every dog knew, they would never see Dave again. Oh, that's sad, isn't it? That's sad. All right, well, that's 2 chapters for today, and we've used up all of our time. And I'm glad you have stories to read, so you practice a story for next time, okay?
Okay. Tomorrow we have class.
Yes, can we do it tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you can ask your mom if we can have class tomorrow. And if it's okay, we'll have class tomorrow. Okay, we'll have class tomorrow then. So you need to practice a story to read.
Okay.
All right, and you're going to read The Glowworm and the Daw?
Yes.
Is it D-A-W?
Yes.
What is it? What is a daw? I don't know what that is. Daw. Daw. Oh, it's a kind of bird.
It's like crow. Can you see it?
Okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay. That's a new word for me. So I'll anxiously be awaiting your story. All right. You have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Class.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, I'm glad you made it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.